Welcome to the Podcast Interview Marketing Show, where we explore big ideas with leading experts on how to grow your brand and business with targeted podcast interviews.
How to be a great guest. It's a question we get asked and one that we ask continually. Over 10 years now, after every interview, we get the feedback from the guest and the host, and we find out what works and what doesn't. You see, everybody's got an opinion, but if you get enough opinions together, if you can get enough data together, then you've got powerful wisdom. And I'm so glad that Cameron Laird, one of our senior podcast relationship managers that works day in and day out with podcasters, is here to share with us the feedback that we get at Interview Valet on what it takes to be a great guest.
Thanks so much, Tom. So Cam, as a podcast relationship manager with Interview Valet and as a podcast host yourself, you have unique experience dealing with podcast guests. So for any of our listeners out there who are interested in getting started or are just starting out, what advice would you have for them?
Yeah, absolutely, Chloe. Well, I suppose first thing starting out, a potential guest or someone just wanting to be a guest should focus on the why of why they want to be a podcast guest to begin with. So having that solid reason in place to ensure that when you do start guesting, that it's actually for the right reasons. Because some people like to start podcast guesting and they're just going to put in content out there and appearing on any old show and just hoping that the exposure will amount to something. And that's not really the best thing. So you're going to put your best foot forward if you are doing it for the right reasons. So what that means is actually having the end result in mind. So if I go on the Chloe Williamson podcast, does Chloe have the audience that I want to speak to? Does she talk about the same topics that I can contribute to? So we want to always ensure that we're aiming to speak on the podcasts that are a fit for us. We don't want to go on any old podcast just for the exposure. I also think that the best thing someone can do starting out in podcast guesting is, even before they start reaching out to the hosts, is that they know kind of best practices. They understand how hosts think, how hosts operate, how they schedule. Obviously, in this digital age, it's not too hard to imagine as we're all on Zoom these days, but do take into account things like they are digital meetings, they're recorded remotely. A time slot is usually allotted and given, and there's kind of certain etiquette and best practices that you can have as well, but we will go into those a little bit later. And then lastly, there's a huge amount of ways to get booked onto podcasts. And while it's never been easier in this day and age, there unfortunately is a huge amount of noise out there when it comes to, guest pitching, numerous booking agencies and platforms vying for the attention of these podcast hosts. And for a relatively new medium that is podcasting, there is going to be a huge surge of recognition and urgency to use podcast interviews as a way to promote oneself. So I think someone starting out can give themselves a huge head start with being successful by just to begin with understanding how to navigate this convoluted space and what it entails.
Got it. So like most things, preparedness is definitely key there. Now, what about during the interview? So let's say everyone follows your advice, they get on the show of their dreams. Obviously, that's half the battle. When they're conducting the interview, what are some strategies that you find effective for engaging the audience?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose tailoring the message to fit the tone of the show, first and foremost, is hugely important. As kind of what I alluded to in my last answer there, is that we want to choose the right podcast for us, and then we want to show up and ensure that we're the right guest for that podcast as well. So ensuring that when we come to the interview, that we're not just talking about me, and our best practices and our ABCs and 1, 2, 3s of how to build a better business. We're talking to the host first and foremost, but actually talking to the audience through the host as well, and offering as much value as we can. And then obviously bringing it back to the heart at the end. So usually when you do chat with a host before the show, or just before the show starts, that kind of is going to be a key topic of discussion or an overall theme of the show that you both will kind of do a deep dive in. So you want to ensure that you're asking yourself throughout and at the end, what is the main takeaway that you want this audience to take away from this interview? So ensure that when you've shared all of this valuable information, that it kind of crescendos into inspiring, actionable insights and key takeaways that will get the audience thinking after they've stopped listening and to remember you as well. So there's also the practical element as well, kind of directing them back to your website, a welcome page where they can find resources and service of yours. So be sure to have some intriguing offers and some calls to action at the end of the interview as well, that while you've offered the value selflessly and have communicated that to the audience through the host, is that you can give some calls to actions as well at the end, so that when these people, when your new fans have listened to the wisdom that you've shared, that they'll come to your website ready to get to know you more, potentially, purchase your services or whatever that you offer.
So the way I see it, as a podcast guest, you have a bit of a unique opportunity where, of course, you can leverage the audience and the audience engagement to promote yourself and, promote what you're trying to sell, if that's what you're doing. You also have an opportunity to get something from the host in that sense, too. That's a whole other network that I find that the guest could probably reach into. And how can a podcast guest do that best, essentially? What can they do with the host and that networking opportunity?
First and foremost, I suppose at a kind of a practical level, something like a personalized thank you card that you can send out after the show. The logistics of that mightn't suit everyone, but something similar can also be done over social media on a post, tagging the host saying just had a wonderful time chatting with Chloe, something simple like that. Obviously, that's very early days in terms of the social media sphere. When an episode is released, obviously promoting or helping to promote the episode is the best thing that a guest can do to be in the host good book. So ensuring that you're sharing their clips to your social media. You can create your own clips as well, or audiograms based on the interviews that you can do. You can share the episode to your newsletter also. These are really, really good things to kind of give back to the host for having you on their show as well, and ensuring that you're committed to that collaborative promotion that you and the host agree on as well. Because these hosts, they're doing their podcast on their own time, and I know that they appreciate any help that they can get to promote the episode and to help grow their podcast. So it's the best thing that a guest can do. But one thing I do know is each host is different, and I'm sure you know that as well, Chloe. So it's always best to just ask before the interview starts, how can you provide the most value for them and for their show? And always ask at the end as well. And that's the best way to network with these hosts. And hopefully you have great conversations and they ask you back again.
All right. Another reason to be prepared, huh?
Absolutely.
So we have the audience engagement, host engagement. This is all great. Let's talk about something that I think could be a little harder for some people to swallow. How do you actually make sure people want to listen to you? What are some techniques or some communication techniques that are good for podcast guesting? How can you create memorable content and experience for listeners? What do you say about that?
Absolutely. Well, there's some neuro-linguistic programming techniques that I could share, but I won't bore you to death, Chloe. But a simple one is matching the host's energy and tone and speed. It's called mirroring. So we want to ensure that when you're appearing on a podcast and the host is, energetic and bubbly, you don't want to show up somber and, a little bit serious, because obviously the host, the fans of that podcast like the host for their energy, and probably the audience matches that energy as well when they're listening. So it can be a bit jarring if you show up without actually mirroring the energy of the host. A big thing, and it sounds kind of commonsensical, but you did kind of allude to in your question, is being natural and conversational. So savviness is a huge thing. And I've been a host chatting to guests and they are total experts in their field. But when the microphone turns on, they don't become their natural selves. They put on a persona and they sound a bit rigid. And I always equate it to having a cup of tea in the kitchen. So you really have to aim to be as calm and as comfortable as you normally are when you're chatting with your friends and family. And it seems simple, but all too often, as I said, you do see guests coming on and they're just very unlike themselves. So aim to be casual / professional as well. That's kind of the two words that I would use to how you want yourself to come across in the interview. So yeah, be yourself. It's the opportunity to, engage with new listeners, show them who you are, how you can help them. Podcasting is such a unique marketing channel that you can build that, know, like, trust through, unlike any other ads. So do take advantage of it.
Okay. And what not to do? What are some things people should avoid and not even consider if they want to be the best podcast guest they can be?
Don't be late. Like I said, about it being like any other online meeting, show up on time, be ready to get going, ask if there's anything that you can do for the host. Again, I always equate being a guest on a podcast to being a guest in someone's home as well. So have that kind of those same values and that same etiquette there. Just like the cinema phones on silent, we don't hear any beeps from your iPhone or a Slack message coming through, which is obviously common in B2B podcasts because people are working just like they're doing interviews during the day. So it's just so easily avoidable and less work for the editor too. And if it's a live stream, there's nothing that can be done, unfortunately. Another thing as well, if you're looking to promote something, your service or your book, do wait until the end. Unless the host is making this episode about what you offer as a service or about your book or something like that, by all means chat away. But most hosts, will give you your couple of minutes at the end to talk about yourself. And that's the time where you can, give your calls to action to bring them back to your welcome page, your website, check out your social media. And it is best to wait until then. Because again, going back to my previous point, you want to talk to the audience through the host as well. So if you're just talking about yourself, what are you going to talk about at the end? You'll have nothing. You'll have spent everything.
So, dear listeners, as I mentioned earlier in the episode, Cam is a podcast host. We're very lucky to have him here. So I'm very willing to bet you probably have some good stories about guest appearances, and I would love to hear one if you'd be willing to share.
Absolutely. One off the top of my head, a memorable one is from as a host, obviously, when I was interviewing a musician a couple of years ago on a podcast I was working on, a video podcast. We were having a technical disaster, which is, especially in the early days, all too common. But the video wasn't working, unfortunately, and then it was, but the guest was using a mobile phone. So another thing as well, ladies and gentlemen, don't use your phone for video podcasts if you can avoid it. And then the file didn't save as well. It was just all very messy, and I was flustered as well. It was beginning to affect my interview. But I do remember this guest was exceptional at not putting me under pressure. He was happy to be there. It was all a very positive experience. And that's something that I'll always remember. So being a guest, going back to being a guest in someone's home, if the host is having a bad experience, and sometimes it happens, and sometimes the host is just as shy or as inexperienced as the guest might be, be there to look after one another as well, and not to put each other under pressure, because it should be an enjoyable experience for both. And you are a guest looking to make sure that the episode goes well, and it's going to be a good reflection of their podcast. So yeah, never put a host under pressure, and always keep positive.
Okay, so Cameron, are there any common mistakes or pitfalls that potential guests should avoid?
Yes, I think that what guests can overlook is the technical aspect of an interview. I don't like to talk about this too much because it's not completely necessary for a guest to, do a great episode with their host and it not to be on AirPods and to use their laptop camera and things like that. But I think it goes a long way if a guest does use an external microphone. And in this day and age, they're so affordable and they're so accessible. So even something like a USB mic that plugs directly into the laptop is going to be better 99% of the time than a pair of AirPods, and 100% of the time better than an internal microphone on your computer. So if you are serious about podcast guesting, invest in an affordable microphone, and they really aren't expensive. They can be $50, maximum, even cheaper than that. And the host will thank you. And if the host has an editing team, they will definitely thank you as well. In terms of video, which, is more and more common these days, it's not as important. I wouldn't say go buy a Canon DSLR camera and spend, $500 on that. But just ensure, I think, while a webcam will suffice on a laptop, do ensure that your lighting is in check. So do sit in front of a daytime in front of the window that's facing you. I have a ring light here. I have a lamp here, and then I've a a ceiling lamp, a light here, just to ensure that while I'm using my MacBook camera, I'm lit in the best way possible so that I'm visible. We don't want to, be too much in the dark because then the video gets grainy. There's also, in terms of eye level, it's quite important to be, like you are now, Chloe, just kind of eye to camera. I could even be a little bit
and
more
the camera
level.
is stacked on many things right now.
Yes.
So it goes to show you gotta
use
work
all
with
the hardback books that you can that you can find in your home, and that goes a long way. I don't think it's the best look to be kind of looking down on the camera as well. So the main mistakes I would see from an audio and video integrity point of view is just ensuring that you sound as best as you can, and with the camera that you have, ensuring that it's a little bit eye level and that you're as lit as possible as well, so that everyone can hear you and see you the best way.
Very good advice too. As someone who's looking at Cameron's camera right now, I know the MacBook webcam is not the best, and
it's doing its best. It's doing its best.
You look like you have a much better webcam going right now. So well done. So Cameron, what is your final piece of advice to give to someone looking to be a great guest?
I would say add value, add the best value that you can. Obviously, we want to be our best selves. We want to be eloquent, cool as a cucumber, sound and look like we're on an NPR podcast. But at the end of the day, you are a guest on someone else's podcast to add value to their audience and to the podcast itself. So have a great experience with the host, enjoy yourself. And the best way to tick all those boxes is to talk about what you know and what you are an expert in, that the host will want to bring you back as well. And obviously, hopefully that other hosts will want to talk to you as well. So add value, represent yourself the best way, be calm, or what was my thing, casual / professional, but add value and have a good time.
All right. Thank you so much, Cameron. That's great advice. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our listeners have a lot to think about. Please let us know where we can find you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, on LinkedIn, I am Cameron Laird. It's quite a crazy name, so I'm sure you will find me along with my crazy hair. If you want to learn more about finding some guests for your podcast, if you're a host, I'm Cameron at interviewvalet.com. Again, as you alluded to earlier, I'm a podcast relationship manager, so my job here in Interview Valet is to link up podcast hosts with our certified guests and ensure that they're a good fit as well, and ensuring that we meet the criteria as well to being solid guests for the hosts in terms of committing to collaborative promotion and all that good stuff. So you can reach me there as well.
Well, I hope that gave you new ideas on how you can take your guesting to the next level, how you can show up, deliver, and also get the results. And I want to leave you with the final quote. This comes from DJ Doug Sandler. He's the host of the Nice Guys on Business podcast. And he once said, when you're a guest, don't worry about promoting yourself. If you do a good job, the host will promote you better than you ever could.